So last time we were going through our, so I think this is hopefully the last part of computing interest credit. Although I've predicted wrong before, but I think we're at the end. The idea here is that every month on the first, it should calculate the interest for the balance of that month, and then create a new transaction, an interest credit transaction for that interest. What we looked at yesterday was going through some of the situations where no interest had been credited either at all or for a while, because the idea, the implementation is that the interest is credited dynamically. So we don't have something that wakes up every month and then calculates the interest and deposits it, although we could look at an implementation of that. It is basically when you ask for the balance, on the fly it says, oops, let me go calculate any interest that might need to be calculated since the last time the balance was requested. So if you're not looking at the balance every day, then it could be months possibly that go by before you check it. So one of the things we found was, first of all, we have to fill in. So what I've been calling multiple retroactive credit. Crossing a year boundary turned out to be not a big deal because we just increment months and let the Java datetime libraries just do their thing. But it's basically the idea of multiple retroactive credit, right? So the situation was, if today is February 28th, 2019, the last interest was credited way back in November. We haven't looked at the balance since then, so when we request the balance, the sort of catch-up interest credits should be done for December, January, and February. And so we have that test. So if we go look at that test here, and I think when we ran all the tests, I think all those tests passed, but we realized that there's a situation we need to handle. Yep, and those all pass. The other situation in terms of filling in retroactive credits was if the last interest credit doesn't exist. In other words, the account was sort of opened, there was some initial deposits, maybe some other transactions were made, but interest was never credited. So for example, let's say a deposit was made and that was the first one. So in a sense, the account came into existence on January 31st, i.e. today, and if we check in a couple of days, there would have been no interest credit, so we couldn't look at sort of from the last to the current. So what we did was we said, okay, we'll count it from basically from January. Ran into a little bit of, we found that since the interest credit date is always guaranteed to be on the first, because that's when we do the credit, the first transaction may be on something other than the first. In fact, it's probably 29 out of 30 chances it's going to be not on the first. So we needed to basically sort of round down this thing. So in a sense, if you deposit on the last day of January and then you get interest credit on February 1st, it basically credits you for the entire January. Now, I'm not going to be so particular about doing what most banks do, which is like an average daily balance. At least not yet. I think that'll be an interesting thing to look at, but I think right now the problem we have to deal with is this situation where when we actually calculate the interest, what balance are we using? So we've gotten all these stories working. However, realize that there's this problem, which is, so let's say we calculate the interest on February 1st, so we're using the balance as of February 1st. But if we're doing the credit, what we're doing is anytime we calculate the interest, we're calculating on the current balance. Right? So even when we're retroactively trying to say, hey, let's calculate interest credit for December 1st, we're using the balance as of today. And while that might be great for your kid, it's incorrect. So what we want is a story where given today is 22/28, 2019. And last interest credit was on, let's say, December 1st of 2018, when we request balance and account, let's see, account. So what we want to do is we want to create a deposit, a couple of deposits, so we can make sure the account gets credited the correct amount. So let's see, so and deposit of $100 was made on let's forget about the interest credit. So was made on December 1st, and then another deposit of, let's say, $200 was made on January 5th. Let's do January 1st of let's do January 15th of 2019. So that means as of basically throughout December and January, the interest should be based on a $100 balance. The February one should be based on a $300 balance, right? It's 200 plus 100. So when we request the balance, then we add interest credits, and here we're going to have to be specific. We want, let's see, we're going to have two catch-up credits. Hey there, I am God Mode. Thank you. We'll get to the actual coding part once we figure out what the test is here. So if the first deposit, basically the first transaction was on December 1st, when we want to calculate the interest credits, we're going to generate an interest credit for, I think, December 1st, and then January 1st, and then February 1st. And so this will be based on, so balance of 300. This one should be based on balance of 100, right? Because as of January 1st, the balance was 100. And also here, based on balance equals 100. And the interest rate we're using makes it so that it's 21 cents per $100. So that should be, say, 21 cents, and this one should be 21 cents. This one should be multiplied by 3, presuming the roundup. It's 20.8 times 3. I'm doing math in my head. 300 times 0.225 divided by 12, 63 cents. I'll have to check that, but it's going to be something like that. Might be 64 cents. 63 seems right. So when we request the balance, we should get 3 interest credit transactions, and then we'll have to dig into them and say the first 2 should be 21 cents because it's based on a $100 balance, and this last one should be 63 cents because on February 1st the balance will be $300. Oh, one thing I'm forgetting, and although probably won't affect the calculations, is technically the balance here is actually $100.21. I don't think that will affect the interest rate, though. So 0.025 divided by 12. So that's our monthly interest rate. And if we multiply it by $100, it turns out to be 21 cents when we round up. Yeah, I mean, that's so far deep in the decimal. The next one will be 42, still round up 21 cents. and even 2160, yeah. So it won't affect our interest calculations. Although we probably should have another test for including interest, credit, in balance. I mean, that should just work because we already calculate that, but I'll leave that here for now. Okay, so this is our test, which is basically ensure that interest credit is based on balance as of interest credit date. And that will be the name of our something like the name of our test. So now let's go write our test. So interest credit amounts should be based on balance as of credit date. And we can delete that. Indent those a couple. Okay. So given today is 228, we can copy this, we can copy this. Don't need to copy the comments. So given today is 228, so that'll create our fixed clock. And the account has, we're going to say actually $100 balance because that's what we said. So create the account. Now we deposit, make sure it's $100 on 12/1 of 2018. So let's change the date here. Then we have another deposit that we're making on 2019 of January 15th, and the comma, oops, there we go. And this is $200. So we deposit on 12/1, another deposit on 1/15. And so now when we request the balance, then we expect these three interest credits. So our expectation is that we should have, let's start easy. So we'll say transactions, which, oops, account dot transactions. There are too many C's in account. There we go. Account dot transactions. So that's the transactions. So this should be has size of 3. Except that's all transactions. So actually, let's go and just use the stream methods. So on account, we want to get the transactions, and we want to stream. We want to turn, and we want to filter because we only want the interest credit ones. So we can use that that functional method. So we expect there to be 3. And we can just do a count for now. And so assert that. It would help if we save this into a variable. And assert that the number of transactions, come on, autocomplete, there we go, is equal to 3. All right, I expect this to work because we are calculating the interest credit in terms of the transactions are being built correctly. But what we want to do is we want to actually check what was, oh, interesting. Oh, there were only 2. Yeah, so actually when I was writing out the test example, because the first deposit was on December 1st, we actually, I think I'm wrong in my assumption, we won't calculate interest on that date, because we sort of the way I'm thinking about it is the interest rate is calculated like a second after midnight, whereas this deposit presumably came in somewhat later on that date. Um, so I think my assumption was wrong. So basically, there should only be two, because we don't calculate one on December 1st. We calculate one on January 1st, and there the balance is $100 even. On February 1st, the balance is $300.21, and we'll calculate 63 cents of credit. So we're going to end up with two interest rate transactions, and then we can check the amount that the first one is 21 cents and the second one is 63 cents. Okay, so change our assumption. Actually, we don't need to change the assumption anymore. So after we filter and we only have interest credits, what we want to do is, the only thing we care about, we don't care about the dates because we already have tests that check that the dates are correct. What we want to do is we want to map it so that what we're getting out of the transaction is the amount. And there we go. I always forget that for IntelliJ to show these little nice information about each step through the stream, stream has to be on its own line. I'm not sure why it does that, but that's the way it does it. So what we can see is the transaction gives us a set of transactions, an immutable set. We turn that into a stream. We filter out. We're still working on transactions, and now we basically have a stream of integers. We could just sum that up and see if it's what, 84 cents. But let's be pretty precise about that. So this will basically, we'll just collect this to list. So I always forget the to list. Darn it, collect. I'm blanking. So this needs to be a list of integer. We could get an int stream, but we'll do integer because that's easier. So that's what I want. I want that the autocomplete. There we go. Okay. Collectors to list. Okay, so what we want here is we're going to basically go through the transactions. We'll filter out so that we're keeping only the ones that are the interest credit. We're only going to pull out the amounts. And so now what we get is we get a list of just the amounts, and that's will be 21 cents and 63 cents. And just remember that we're storing amounts as scaled integers, so we store basically multiplying everything by 100. So 21 cents will be just the integer 21, 63 cents will be just the integer of 63. I'm just going to correct these. There's no way for us, the way the transactions are created, to determine what the balance that was used. That would be interesting to store in transactions, sort of what was the point in time balance of when the transaction occurred. That would be good sort of for an audit trail. So I might add that. Let me add that as a story. Balance as of point in time when the transaction was created. Cool. Okay, so we don't assert this anymore. What we want to assert is that our transactions contains exactly order doesn't, matter. So it contains exactly 21 and 63. And let's run that and see it fail. I bet it'll be 63 and 63. Yep. So this is basically saying, well, I got 63 and 63, but I expected 21 and 63. And again, that's expected because we're always calculating the interest based on the current balance. All right, so now that we have a failing test, that's good. Let's go and look at the calculation of the interest. So here's where we do the interest calculation. We calculate it based on, so we're given the credit date and time, but when we actually calculate the balance, all we do is we just take the stream, map to int of the signed amount, sum it up, and we're done. We don't want to do that. We want to map it basically as of a certain date. Let me convert this like this. So what we can do is we can filter, and so now we need a predicate. We need to say we only want those transactions where the date time is on or before, no, before. So this is going to come from the transaction, and it's the date time. And let's see. Now that's going to we want to filter, not transform. So T we actually don't need the brackets. So we'll say T dot date time is before the credit date time. I think that's it. Right, so basically what this is saying is, I don't know why it's not showing those helpers. Anyway, so what we're doing is we're converting the transactions that are in the account to a stream, and we're filtering out so that we keep only the ones where the transaction date is before the credit date time, right? So if we're calculating the interest for December 1st, we're only going to see transactions that are before December 1st, which is what we want. My Pomodoro just went off, so let's see if this test passes, and then take a quick break. And that worked. I'm going to rename current balance to balance through credit date. And okay, that was actually a little bit easier than I thought it would be. Streams can be awesome. So if we go back to our BDD story, we're saying so we requested the balance, we got the correct amounts, we go to our test, and that's all good. We could write another test, but let's take a break since my Pomodoro is expired and I've got a few minutes left on a break. We'll take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll look at and see what's next. All right, be back in a few. All right, and we're back. Yes, comment made by I am God Mode. Yes, this stuff is BDD. Wow, perfect timing. My new Pomodoro just started. Yeah, this is BDD. This is, there's nothing to it. I think there's a lot of confusion about what it is and what it's for and who does it. there's this whole area of writing automated tests using this given then when syntax. Um, in my experience, and other people obviously have different experience, but in my experience, trying to automate this is not useful because it takes a long time. It's not like magic. It's not AI doing interpretation of English. You have to do regular expression matching and other things like that. What I find is it's useful to look at it this way and have really solid concrete examples for when you're talking with the business folks. Um, in this project, I'm acting as both the developer and product manager slash customer because I'm defining what I need. But you can see that this stuff really helps us write examples that are very clear. And then once we have that, right, sort of figuring out the scenarios is the hard part. Implementing it, as we saw in the test, is really straightforward. And then you get tests that are pretty readable. And I could take out these comments because, given today's 2119, well, it says create fixed clock on that. So that's almost redundant. But it's useful to copy, as you saw with the test I created, copy this into the test and then just implement it. The idea of automating this was, business folk will be able to read this and get involved and they'll write their own. I've never experienced that happening. The only thing I've experienced is QA folk trying to do this up front, but they couldn't implement everything on their own, so it was a big waste of time. Yeah, the problem so as I'm God Mode says, for business people to understand this they can understand because this is English, but the maintenance of this, and they're never going to come back and look at it, at least in my experience. Other people have their own experiences, but in my experience, this is useful for extracting this information from the business folk, getting this in concrete examples, and you want multiple concrete examples. Examples are the best thing ever. You need lots of them to really flesh out and get the edge cases and you know, for example, this one, are we supposed to be calculating interest on this date or not? And I basically said no, and I've defined that in my expectation here. But in my experience, trying to automate the execution of this just isn't worth it. Because at least the business folks that I've worked with, the product managers, they they're not dumb. They're smart, and they can read this test. And maybe the first time they look at it, they can't read it easily, but you walk them through a couple of them and they can totally read it. Though I've never experienced them going off on their own and reading it. Usually we're doing it as a group. And so if we're doing it as a group, this is pretty readable. If they run into anything like, hey, what does this any match do? We can tell them about it and then they'll know. All right. So let's look at our BED stories. So we basically took care of this situation. So I think we've got all of our BDD stories. So the only thing is ensuring that the interest credit is in the balance. So basically that we get sort of compounding. So let's write one test for that. I think that's this is one of those tests that I kind of feels like it's a comforting test. I don't feel like I feel like we might have captured that, but it might be useful um, to write a quick test for that. And then I think we can call this feature done. Uh, we'll test it also then from the front end and see that it calculates it retroactively on real data. So let's write a test that interest credit should include interest, include previous interest credits. I mean, I sort of don't see how this wouldn't work, but it's useful to do it. So What we want to set up is that the balance is sufficiently large that we can detect the change. So we'll go ahead and we'll copy these because the dates don't matter, so we'll just sort of copy this. And I'm going to remove these comments. So we created fixed clock, we created when this deposit was, and this basically becomes $10,000. Yes, I know this is Kid Bank, and I will not be giving my kid $10,000. If I'm paying $10,000 for anything, it'll be college. Let's actually make this deposit a bit earlier so that we can get a bunch of calculations. So let's go back to, let's say 10, because the interest that will be calculated on this is going to be, so that's in cents, that's in dollars, 0.025. So that's 2.5%. That's the current rate I'm using for interest divided by 12. So that'll be $21. And then $1,021 we should detect as having an interest rate, interest calculation of, I wonder if that's enough. Yeah, that might not be enough to detect. Let's do $2,000. So that'll give us $42. I feel like there's an easier way to do this, but yeah, the problem is the scale. Let's see, 104. Yeah, let's do 50,000. So we expect there to be, so if this is deposited on, and let's put it on the last day of October, we'll get interest credit on 11/1 of 2018 to be equal to, what was it, 50,000 times 0.025% divided by 12, so 104.17. And then on 12/1/2018, it'll basically be calculated based on 5,000. So what do we say this was? Yeah, 50,000. 5 divided by 12. And if we add 104, so that should be 104.39. I almost feel like I just want to like run it and see what it comes out with, and then throw the test away, because I feel like this is not going to tell us very much. So basically, then the last one, since today is the 28th, and let's make this January 28th, so that way we only have 3 transactions. We'll have this one on 1/1/2019, and that's going to be, I don't know, 104, probably something like 60 something. I don't know, we'll see about that. I could plug this into a spreadsheet and have it figure it out, but all right, so we're going to request the account balance. We could just check the balance directly. Did it add up these 3? But let's look at the transactions. And we're going to do pretty much what we did here, because all we want to do is pull out the interest credit transactions, get their amounts, collect them to a list. So we expect 104.17. So remember, these are scaled dollars, 104.39, and I'm guessing 104.60. I think that 104.60 is going to be higher, but we'll see. So let's run the tests. Yeah, actually I was off on this one. It's I guess the 104.60 right. Good for me. So this should be 104.38. Okay, so that means it's working properly. I honestly don't know how useful this is. This is very dependent on the interest rate, which is currently a constant. So that's something that I'd be concerned about, is that we currently calculate the interest. So if we go to balance and we have this interest rate here that's hard-coded. That's going to be modified. I have a later story to pull this in and base the interest rate on the current 3-month Treasury bill rate, because why not? Not a necessary feature, but interesting from a learning standpoint that, hey, what does it look like if we go and grab the interest rate from some external source? So from a testing standpoint, we probably want to fix that. And by fix, I mean isolate it and solidify it so that it's predictable. But I'm not going to do that now. I'm going to just put that as a story. Ensure that interest rate is fixed for testing purposes. And this is more of a task than an actual user story. So I think based on, and let's just run all the tests again. If I was really, I don't know if paranoid is the word, but one thing I could do is ensure that, so we can do sorted, and we can sort and I'm always blanking on how to do the comparator. Comparator, comparing, oops. I'm going to have to search for it again. Okay, so that's what we want. We want this. Oops. And need the dot there. Okay. So what I'm doing here is I'm actually don't want it reversed. So I want to sort the transactions in chronological order, and so I want to basically say contains exactly, and not in any order. I want it really specifically in this order. So that provides a little bit of a tighter constraint on what I'm testing. So let's run that. And they all pass. Okay. So I think let's commit and we'll push and we'll try out the, actually before we push, let's just try it out from the UI. So let's go ahead and run the application. All right, that took a little while to come up. And we'll go to local, whoops, localhost. Wrong. Ah, okay. So there is the situation where, and I probably don't want to throw an exception. So we're getting an index out of bounds exception because when it tries to calculate the interest, it looks for the first transaction. So it looks for the most recent interest credit transaction. There aren't any. Then it looks for the most recent, the oldest, just regular transaction. It doesn't find any, and then it throws an exception. So I think we need to handle that better. So probably should have had an integration test for that, but let's go fix it. So where we're doing that is here. So this was from yesterday where we're trying to figure out where do we start retroactively filling in the interest credits. One of the rules we said was, well, do it since the last one, right? So if the last interest credit was on November 1st, then the next one is going to be on December 1st. That's this part. However, if there were no interest credit transactions at all and just some deposits, then we fall back to using the earliest transaction time. If there is none, I was throwing an exception. I actually think that is wrong. We don't want to throw an exception. What we want to do is, what do we want to do? So this is being used here, right? So when we credit interest as needed, we're basically finding what is the most recent transaction date time, because then we're going to loop through. But I think I initially didn't want to return an optional and just throw an exception. So I have two options, no pun intended. I could wrap this with a try catch, or I could have this return an optional, and if the optional is not present, in other words, basically null, then I can just return and not do anything. I think I like the latter better. So let's go here. We take out the or else throw. It's now not going to like this. Oops. So this is no longer a supplier of local date time. It's now just an optional of local date time, right? So, right, because it's now no longer a function that supplies a date time. It's actually now an optional. So let's combine this and then do that. So this might return null. So we can't say or else get because this is expecting to be guaranteed. So basically, I think we can say just or else. What is it? Or else. So we can't have an optional here. So there must be a way to do this, because this one could be not present, and if it's not present, we'd like to return. Oh, well, the reason why this is problematic is we need to change this, because this now is not returning a local date time, it's returning an optional local date time. That still doesn't work here. And I can't do that because yeah, so I think what I have to do is, and I'll have to look to see if there's a better way. If the most recent credit transaction is present, then I return that. Why did my curly braces show up? Else return that. Okay. So what'll happen is if there is no most recent interest credit transaction, in other words, there aren't any credit transactions, then this is present will fail and we'll just return the first transaction date time. So now we've got a problem. I must be missing a brace here, otherwise I wouldn't have all that red. Yeah, there we go. Whew. I thought like, oh my god, what did I do? I broke everything. No, there's only one line that I need to change. So this was assured of getting a local date time. We've realized that no, that's not the case. It's going to be it could be an optional. Um, so what we want to do is most recent dot so basically if it's not present we want to return. So if it's not present, then we'll just return. And then here we can do a dot get. I'm not happy about this. So the other way we could do this, let me just run all my tests while I'm talking about another way to do this. This loop here is looping from the most recent transaction, or at least the first of the month after the most recent transaction, looping from there to the first of the current month. Right, so it's basically if the most recent transaction was 11/15, then this and today equals, actually let's use, if the most recent transaction was on March 15th and today is June 2nd, then this will loop from 4/1 to 6/1. Right, so we sort of round this to the next month, the first of the next month, and we round this down to the first of the current month. If we return this as basically after today, then this loop will basically just be completely ignored. So that's another possibility, is that instead of returning an optional and carry it around, we can return a date that's in the future, so this loop will basically be just ignored. It would eliminate the optional, it would eliminate this if statement, I wouldn't need this get anymore. On the downside, it might be weird. So I'm not sure that would be easier to understand. So let's leave this for now. I can think about refactoring it later. Oh, I restarted the application. I actually wanted to run all the unit tests. Those should still all pass. I don't actually have a unit test for if there are no transactions. I probably should. Oh yeah, okay. Good thing I run all the unit tests. I had been only running the interest credit tests, and those all work. These other tests are not taking into account the fact that interest credits happen, which is interesting. Like the spend money should reduce account balance. It's not taking into account that when we request account balance, it calculates interest rates. So money spent should reduce. So I think what we can do is we can force the current date to be the same as the date on which the account spend happened. That's one option, and that will make sure that interest rate isn't getting calculated. The other possibility, and I don't think I'm going to do that today, but this brings up a situation of sort of isolation, and there's sort of fixing the context. I want to make sure that the context is fixed so I can test the thing that I'm curious about. This thing is saying, hey, if I do a spend transaction, does it reduce the amount? The fact that this other thing happens, this interest rate crediting, is kind of annoying and in the way, and I'm not really testing that part. What I'd like is to be able to, from a testing standpoint, inject the interest rate credit code. And for those of you who know design patterns, that would be a strategy design pattern. What is the strategy for calculating interest rate? That would also make this easier. Not this part, but the problem we just ran into. Because what we could do is we could swap out strategies for if there's no transactions, and Pomodoro finished, wow. If there's no transactions, we could have a no-op interest rate crediting, and all it would do is basically do nothing. And so then I wouldn't have to have this optional and this if and so on. I can always be assured that this method right here, most recent interest rate credit daytime, would only be called if there's at least one transaction. That's interesting. So now the question is do I want to do the work of, so in favor of pulling it out into a strategy is it makes isolating the spend test as well as this other balance test, basically pulling the interest rate calculation out of the equation, and also make the account is empty situation. Oh, and then it would make the interest rate calculation tests possibly easier? Now, this refactoring, I have a feeling, is going to take me past my my 130 hard stop. So I'm not going to do that now, but I am going to put that as a story. And I think I might do that next. So I'm going to add a card here. This is a refactor. Refactor interest crediting to strategy to support easier testing and situation where no transactions exist. No, I actually really like that. I'm going to do that, but again, I'm not going to do that today. I will do that next time. So it's a bit weird for me to leave these tests failing. I've got 3 tests failing, and I think I can fix these by just setting up the fixed clock. So let's do that. So instead of just creating an account with a new fake repository, there's an overloaded constructor that takes a fixed clock. So let's insert a fixed clock here. I'll make these all on the same day. Yeah, because the dates don't matter here. So let's see, do I have that in my, no, I don't. Okay, so let's go to the interest rate credit where I have this. And I will have to move this to, so let's go, I think I can make this static. Oops. Well, that's okay, that's okay. Okay, let me move this into a new class. So we're going to move these to test clock support. And I have, you might think, why didn't he call that test clock utilities? Because I don't know, I have this aversion to names that either are manager or utilities or impl. Those are like, I avoid them even when they might be correct. So I'll move this to test clock support. Both of these static methods will go. We'll refactor that. And yes, it goes into the test package because it's only for tests. Yes, I want to create it. Okay, boom, those are moved. Go back to interest rate credit test. Why are these now? Oh, because it put it in the root package as opposed to the domain package. So let's move this into the domain package. And now we're good. Okay, so these will, so let's run all the unit tests again. I expect the same ones to still fail, but I just want to make sure I haven't broken the interest rate credit ones. And yes, my Pomodoro timer just went off. Actually, that we blasted through the break, actually. Okay, all the other tests pass, all the interest rate credits ones pass, just all the same ones failing. Okay, good. So let's go and fix this one first. So here, we'll create a fixed clock on, and we'll pull this in. We'll import static method. And we'll call it, we'll use the same date, we'll use 5. I'm going to change both these dates because the dates really do not matter. So that way, it's basically saying today is, we'll pass in the clock. So we're basically saying today's May 11th, this deposit and this spend happened on May 11th. So when we ask for the account balance, no interest will be calculated because the first transaction is basically today. So if we run all our tests, all our balance tests should pass. And indeed they do. So now we can go and fix the spending tests. And could pull this into a before method. But let's just put it in here. So this clock is going to be on the same date, 2012, 10/11. I can also refactor this one actually because I now have that convenient local date time at midnight of. And I can get rid of these zeros that I've had to type in everywhere for minutes and hours. And I can do the same thing here. And the same thing here. And get rid of that comma space. And here I'll need a clock that going to be on 2013 of 12/12. Right, so basically today is December 12th. This spend happened on December 11th. This other spend happened on December 12th. When we request December 12th, it should not affect there should be no interest credited. And I need to pass in the clock. And I didn't pass in the clock here. And now that should get all the tests passing. Boom. All right. Okay, so now that all tests pass, let's once again try to run the application and try it out from the UI. All right, and now almost there, almost there. Okay. Great, so we've got zero balance. Let's do an import from our comma separated file, which is, where'd it go? It's here. Actually, that shouldn't be in that directory. I originally put it in the resources directory because I thought I'd import it, but actually we're not. I'm just going to move it to the root directory of the project. Okay. And what I want to do is copy this. Oh, I still have a story. So this will be interesting. Okay. So if you look at these transactions, this is the one again, for those of you who haven't seen anything before, this is the CSV file that was exported from my Excel spreadsheet, which is what I was using previously to track my son's virtual bank account. So, right, the whole goal of this app was to replace that spreadsheet. So this is basically those transactions. What you'll notice is though I've got some manually entered interest rate credit line items here. I don't know if I thought I had a story, and I'll take a look in a second. So if we import this, we're going to see double interest credits because they're the ones that had imported from the CSV, and then when I requested balance, it then calculated those again. Or not. No, did it work correctly? Ah, okay. So here's what happened. So here was the manual one imported from the CSV that I pasted into there. Because it was marked as a deposit instead of an interest credit, it was not, it basically duplicated it. So it got an interest credit. And yes, that 10 cents is higher because originally I did it based on 2% as opposed to 2.5%. Woohoo, an extra 2 cents. So there's basically a bug where uh, because this was marked as a deposit as opposed to an interest credit, is that a bug or did I not have that in the CSV file? No, I have it marked as interest credit. So that's a bug. Okay. So it imported that incorrectly. I think because I had done that before I had done all the interest credit stuff, and so it wasn't a bug before, but it is a bug now. And so we'll have to fix that. So that's why now this is the one that got imported from the CSV, and then this was the one that got imported, not imported, generated through the interest rate credit process, generating those interest credits retroactively. So that worked. So we got one for February of 18, March of 18, April of 18, May, June, July. And then we got a whole bunch because the last deposit, at least that I recorded in the spreadsheet, was here. And we can see that it correctly then generated interest credits basically through January. And that looks correct, 33 cents. And then it just crossed over the threshold, so that's now 34 cents. So there's two tasks, or not tasks, but two things I need to fix. One is I'd like the interest credit description to say what was the interest rate that it was using, because I did that when I did it manually. I basically said I'm basing this on 2% a year. So I'd like it to do that. I think we're going to add another list, and this is going to be bugs. And so this will be here. I'm going to say this bugs/tasks. So I'm going to put this here, and this is a task. This one was have the transaction keep track of what was the balance at this point in time. Again, sort of more for auditing purposes. It's not really a user story. Maybe it's a story. I'll put it back there. Oh, okay, so I had the story, import CSV ignoring interest rate credit transactions, and it would depend on the, okay, so that, I forgot, this is actually the story that was supposed to be next. After I finish this calculate interest credit, which we've just done, this one was supposed to be next. So let's, so let's see. So it's not a bug, it's more that I knew it was a story and we had to do it. And so I guess we'll do it. So we're going to call this calculate interest credit story done. Yes, there's this part that has to deal with import. Technically, that's a bug of the import, not of the calculate interest credit. Credit interest did the right thing. So we're going to say calculate interest credit is done. Woohoo! And that reminds me, I still have a task. Have a hooray celebration sound effect for completing stories. Because I just feel like when I'm doing live streaming that when I drag it over to done, there should be like a little bell ringing saying success, yay. Okay, let's do a commit. So we've tested this, we can stop the application right now. We'll commit, and this is episode 11, calculate interest based on balance as of the date of the credit. And that all looks good. So test clock support we pulled out. Fixed other tests that broke due to interest rate, interest credit calculation. Oh, that reminds me. So I just want to check that we have that. Yeah, so that's our refactor. I don't think we're going to get this to today, so I'm going to put this back here. That'll be the next thing we do next time. What I'd like to do, what we'll do after I commit is we'll do this import CSV, and we actually won't ignore the interest credit. We'll just actually import it properly because they are tagged appropriately, so we should do that. Okay, so we'll commit, and we'll push. And the push will cause Heroku to see that there was a push. So yesterday it redeployed, rebuilt, and then redeployed. And so it should do that the same thing today, as soon as it picks it up. And you can see the build in progress because it just saw that the push succeeded. Okay. And so what were we doing again? This is why I need story tracking, because I'm like, usually when I have a pair, they're keeping track of the stories, but I'm relying on Trello to do that. Okay, we said we're going to do this. Yeah, I know I have this persistence and integration task cleanup. I keep avoiding it because I need to do some research, and that's kind of boring to do on a video stream, so I need to do that before next time. Okay, so we're not ignoring interest rate credit. We are properly interpreting interest rate credits transactions. Okay. And I'd spelled properly wrong. Proper T. All right. So let us go to CSV import test. So we've got tests here. Command F12? Yeah. So we've got tests for multiple deposit rows, should be multiple deposit transactions, single row deposit, single row. Okay, so actually this test is wrong, or now needs to change, because a single row interest credit should actually result in a single interest credit transaction. So instead of comparing it against the deposit, it actually should be an interest rate credit. We know I'm not, Oh, this is interesting. The create interest credit transaction method, oh, it just doesn't accept doesn't expect any kind of comment because it's going to automatically fill that in. Okay. I can start also. I'll do that replace later. All right, so we expect that now if it pulls this in, that it's going to create an interest rate credit transaction with this date and time and this amount. And if we run all our unit tests, I generally like to run all my unit tests unless there's something I'm trying to fix, because running even 34, which just isn't a lot of unit tests, is no slower really than running just one. Cool. That failed as expected because we didn't change any behavior, right? So side note is that TDD doesn't just mean when you're actually developing new code. It's also a way of always making sure that a test fails. This isn't necessarily TDD, but it's always good practices to make sure you have a test fail. And it might require changing an existing test, right? So that's the situation here, is we said, oh, actually we want these CSV lines to be marked as an interest credit transaction. So when we change an expectation, we have to change a test. It should fail, and now we can go change the behavior. So let's go into our CSV importer. It calls this transaction from CSV, which then uses create transaction from. So right now is treating these three cases the same. So all I need to do is create a new one, say transaction equals transaction, create interest credit with the local date time and the amount, break, and that should fix it. Oh. Import command should load transactions into, oh, that's interesting. That one didn't break before. Oh, I know what this is. All right, so let's go look at this. And this is why I always run all unit tests, because you may fix the thing you're working on and find out you broke something else. Because this is a higher level test, was saying, hey, if we through the UI, or basically one level below the UI, this is an integration test. We sent this content with an interest credit, but we didn't change our expectation here that this should be now an interest credit. And this is why you don't want to have a lot of complex integration tests, because if I had a lot of these, I'd have to change a lot of them. All right, so now let's run all the tests again. And I think now they should all pass. And indeed they do. Awesome. And so now if we run the application, when we do the CSV import from the UI, all right, so the app is running. Let's go refresh. It should be empty. If we do an import, so let's go back to our CSV, grab all these, paste them in there, do import. And now that worked, right? So now the one that I imported for February 1st, for March 1st, these were all imported from the CSV and marked as interest credit. So we no longer have the double interest credits. And we do have the ones that are automatically filled in retroactively since the last interest credit of May 1st. We've got June 1st. And that all looks good. All right, well, then we can commit that. So this is still episode 11. And this is import interest credit transactions from CSV categorizes them as interest credit transactions. Sounds a bit redundant, but basically that's what it did. So we basically modified our CSV importer, modified the tests to change the expectations to match, and this completes the interest credit story. Yay! So we'll commit that, and we'll push that, go over here, drag this over to done. Woohoo! And that's it for today. So I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and feel free to hit me up on Twitter or on my website. I have my email address there because I don't care about spam. I'm assuming you guys are not going to spam me, or you folks. So that information is down below on my channel. You can hit me up. You can eventually I do some light editing and upload these to YouTube. So Twitter is probably the best place to just hit me up. Email might take longer. Comments on the YouTube channel are acceptable as well, but I do moderate them. And that's it. So next time, which as I mentioned, my schedule is a bit busy. So next time, which will probably be 10 or 11 days from now, we'll look at refactoring this to a strategy. And then we get to start working on sort of more features again. So I think the next thing that I want to do is either simple authentication, which is sort of a bit of just tying some APIs together, and so not much of a feature. I really want to do this SMS, and I'm going to use Twilio's SMS features to do this because it makes it really, really easy. So I'm probably going to do this next time. But if you have any ideas, I also have a suggestion extension that you can throw some suggestions on there. All right, that's it for today. See you next time, and thank you very much. Bye.